Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, Creating More Consistency in Cost Savings and ROI Metrics to Build the Case for OER. My name is Annika Manny and I'll be moderating our webinar today. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Resources from this webinar will be available on the MEC website after the event. We ask that you use the Q&A box to submit your questions, and we will address questions at the end of the webinar. And you will be receiving a survey after the webinar, and we ask that you do complete that survey so that we can continue to improve our offerings related to OER and the work at MEC. I'm Annika Manny. I am the OER consultant for MEC, and I work with Jenny Parks, who is the Vice President of Policy and Research. She's not able to join us today, so I will be moderating. For those of you who may not be familiar with MEC, it is the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. It was legislatively created and serves the Midwest census region, which are the 12 states that you see highlighted in the map above. MEC is governed by 60 commissioners plus commissioner alternates, and it's one of the 4 regional higher education compacts in the country. And with our partners in our OER work and our grant from the Hewlett Foundation. That includes NEVI, the New England Board of Higher Education, SREB, the Southern Regional Education Board, and WICHE, the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. So our 4 compacts have been collaborating to create a National Consortium for OER, or NCOER. We are generously supported by the Hewlett Foundation, and some of the work that you're going to hear about today is part of our project for this collaboration. So what we're going to be talking about today is our work around OER cost savings and return on investment, or ROI. In early April, we convened a working group of institutional, state, and national leaders to help advise us on our efforts to develop a set of principles to improve the consistency and reliability of measuring cost savings and return on investment for OER. And this is one of our research projects that we've taken on as part of the NCOER and the Hewlett grant. If you have questions about the larger portfolio of work related to OER that MEC is engaging in, you can reach out to me or Jenny at the emails you see here on the screen. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Katie Zyback, our consultant who is leading and facilitating the work on OER cost savings and ROI. Right, Katie, you are muted.
Thanks, Annika. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick. Can everybody see?
Looks great. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Annika, and an overview of MEC's work. My name is Katie Zyback. I am a consultant with MEC, as Annika said, and my background is in state higher education policy. I've worked with a number of organizations over the last couple of years nationally, and then most recently at the Colorado Department of Higher Education. And it's really fun for me as a policy generalist to be able to be working with the OER community and to get to come in with an outsider's perspective and really understand the data and the research and bring it together so that we can turn it into decision making. And so that's really kind of been my focus through this project. So as Annika said, this is a consortium that's led through all the regional compacts. And one of the real values of doing this policy work through our regional compacts is the audience that they serve, the high-level decision makers at the state level the legislators, and then also institutional leaders. I think our regional compacts really bring an important group of people to the table to be able to make high-level actions that improve outcomes for students. And so through our work, we are supported by both Jenny and Annika, who represent the MHEC. We are also, Tanya Spilboy and Liliana Diaz are involved in this work from WICHE. At SREB, Charlotte Daly is part of this work, and at the New England Board of Education, Lindsay Gum is part of this work. And so we have good representation from all of our compacts to help guide our work. I wanted to share a little bit about the process that we've taken for this work. So one of the things I noticed in a very early landscape analysis of the literature on OER cost savings is that this is an industry that has done a really amazing job of researching itself. And we have a lot of really valuable data and information and good quality research already out there around particularly cost savings and improved outcomes in OER. And so when I talked to the team at MHEC, we really agreed that this is not a initial rigorous research project. Rather, what this project is geared to do is to consolidate and bring together, synthesize, if you will, the data that's already out there and the good research that's already out there, and bring it together so that it can move up to decision makers. I think one of the things that distinguishes the OER community is that it really is a grassroots effort. And so I think that's part of the reason we have such good research on this, on the work that we've been doing, is that what institutional faculty do is they research. That's how they've been trained. They've been training in research and in improving learning and serving students. And so it's really a cool community to be working with, to have that grassroots research already done for us so that we can bring best practices to our legislators and our institutional decision makers. So the process involved convening a work group, which will meet 4 times through the end of 2021. That work group is really kind of helping inform each step of this process, and you'll meet them in a second. The next part of the process was to conduct a literature review to understand what's already out there, and not just the research literature, but also included in this is what tools are already out there to help us understand cost savings and ROI for return on or for open education resources. We've done a lot of that work and are now moving into sharing some initial insights and principles and a direction with OER insiders. So the various different groups who have been working so hard to move forward this movement. And so hopefully we will come to a group that you are part of. And if not, I have an opportunity for you to let us know whether or not you'd like us to come talk to a group. From there, our advisory committee, our work group, will start to finalize principles and a framework for the final product. And then we will review with more broad stakeholders, people like business officers, trustees, maybe institutional researchers, people who are on the periphery of this movement, but who are impacted by the work that we do. And the ultimate goal is to create more consistency and reliability in the field for measuring cost savings and return on investment of open education resources. So next, I want to introduce you to our amazing work group. And many of the members of this work group are on this webinar. And so I just want to say a special thank you to all of them because they are willing to give their time and their expertise and their insights to inform this process. So we have Amy Hoffer from Open Oregon Education Resources. We have Bob Awkward from the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education, Kendra Lake from North Central Michigan College, James Glossplag, and I hope I did not butcher his name, from the College of the Canyons. We have Scott Hochberg from OpenStax, who is also kind of our resident legislator or former legislator. Nicole Allen from Spark, Eddie Watson from AACNU, Zana Droscher from RPK Group, Jeff Gallant from Affordable Learning Georgia, Judith Sebesta from Digital Higher Education Consortium of Texas, Timothy Anderson from Minnesota State, Dale Sanders from the Missouri bookstores, and Nancy O'Neill from the University System of Maryland. So thank you so much for all of the work that you are doing to inform this, to those of you who are on the phone, and to those of you who know these individuals. Definitely make sure that you are connecting with them about your thoughts on this topic as well. So what are we doing? So our goal is to create a common set of principles that improve consistency and reliability for the field in cost savings and return on investment. We want the final product to make it possible for somebody to replicate a single number. And we're not sure whether or not we'll publish a single number. That's a big part of what our group has been discussing. But we really want to create a single framework, or right now it's looking like a couple frameworks that the field can use to look at cost savings and return on investment. Our audience for this work is really important, and you can kind of think about who MEC's audience is, and that's really who our audience for this work is. So it's decision makers, legislators, system heads, institutional leaders. These are the ones who really need this kind of consistency. But I want the final product to be accessible so that our students and people in the public can understand and use this resource to understand cost savings in this topic. The reality is that who's probably most going to use an in-depth report is the people who are informing decision makers. They're people like I used to be at the Colorado Department of Higher Education, where my job was to let both our department and our legislators know what was the smartest way to move forward a single policy. And once they moved forward that policy, what was the smartest way to measure it? So it's really going to be a tool for practitioners to use to inform decision makers. So why are we doing this work? I think many of you on the phone probably have some ideas about why you think we should do this work. That's probably why you're here. I want to tell you why the group thinks we're doing this work and what we got down to in our first meeting. First of all, advocates need a concise statement that clearly and accurately communicates the value of OER. And so cost savings is one of the fundamental values of OER. There are many other values of OER, but this is a fundamental, and we want to be able to have a clear and concise statement. Next, decision makers want a consensus-based metric to use or to customize when they are measuring cost savings and return on investment for OER, both to students and to their organizations, whether that's an institution, a department within an institution, or at the state level. Leaders need to understand the good work and progress that's already created and that can be used to measure. So there's a ton of research out there about what it looks like to measure cost savings, in particular of OER. And so we need our leaders to have easy access to that research. Practitioners who have limited time need a shortcut to help them to understand how to communicate cost savings and return on investment. So I think back to my days in Colorado and how filled they were with multiple different policy areas. Easy to understand resources that allowed me to get to an endpoint quickly without having to do all the research myself were my favorite things to access, and they made my job so much easier. So that's the vision of this document. And finally, we all need to ensure that OER is accomplishing what we hope that it accomplishes. And so hopefully this resource will be a tool to help us measure ourselves and the way that we are having an impact. So some of the considerations that were identified by our working group. First of all, we wanted to name that there's a complicated tension between the goals of the OER movement and the traditional textbook industry. Second, the group really agreed that context matters. The principles of this framework need to meet people where they are, whether that the context differs by state government structures, by different types of institutions. We know that there's a difference between our community colleges and our four-year high research institutions and even our regional comprehensive institutions. So we want a framework that can work for all these contexts. And we know that there's differences in academic subjects. There's probably a lot of other places that there are differences too, but these are just some of the important ones that came through. Next, consensus is important. The principles probably won't be perfect, and there may be a number of revisions to the principles over the years. But we want to find something that's sufficient, that has sufficient agreement across our stakeholders so that we really can align and unify the field. There's enough research out there that you're starting to see some consistency already in what states are doing and what institutions are doing. And so really this is an effort to capture that consistency that's already emerging and to hopefully create some consensus in the field so that we spend less time creating new things and more time innovating or using our measurements to innovate. Let's stop creating new ways to measure. Let's measure and then create new ways to do things. And then finally, the perfect shouldn't be the enemy of the good. The principles and any associated framework should be pragmatic, something that can actually be implemented and executed on. And it's okay if they change in the future. This is a really great starting point. So those are some of the considerations. In order to kind of get to these goals and acknowledge these considerations, we set out with a number of key questions. And these key questions have really guided the literature review. And you'll see that some of the findings from these questions have, I'll talk a little bit about those as I talk about the principles in a few minutes. So one of the things we wanted to know is what's already out there. And what's good and what's bad about what's already out there, what's working well, what different contexts do they work for. So we've been reviewing state models, we've been reviewing national models, many that you're probably familiar with. I know OpenStax has a number, the Spark has published a number, and then also states like North Dakota and Colorado even have been able to report out on their cost savings. So we're looking at kind of all those things that are already out there in the field. So to that, what are the best practices that are starting to emerge? What is the difference between cost savings and ROI? I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes as I talk about how we've developed the initial thinking of the framework. How is cost savings and ROI different from the state, for the state, the student, and the institution? And one of the things you'll see in a moment when I talk about the two frameworks we're looking at is that there is a distinction between cost savings and ROI. And cost savings is typically associated with the student, and the costs that the student are recouping because of OER, and ROI is more of a measure that has to do with the institution and how much is an institution or a state investing, and what is the return that that institution and the state are getting. How do we define OER when measuring cost savings? and ROI. So the definition is fundamental here. What is the time horizon for measuring the impact of OER? And how do we account for non-monetary costs? And what research is already out there about accounting for non-monetary costs or returns associated with ROI? So those are the kinds of questions we are asking as we look at the literature. So one of the things I mentioned is the importance of definition. And I think that the ultimate report will have probably a large discussion on the definition, a discussion that's designed to help decision makers. But when we think about open education resources, the working definition we're kind of starting to use is the Doers 3 definition, which has been adapted from the Hewlett Foundation's definition of OER. So it's defined as instructional material that are fully accessible and reside in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. So they're open. Open education resources include full courses. They include course material, modules, textbooks, streaming videos, tests, software, and other tools, materials or techniques used to support knowledge. So they're resources. They're not just textbooks. There's lots of different resources that can be included. And the other distinction we've been talking through, and I'm looking around at definitions on, is the extent of free. So there's free cost resources that fall under this definition, and there's low cost resources that fall under this definition. And so how do we think about handling those in a ROI or a cost savings calculation? So some of the standards that emerged from the field and kind of the framework that we're starting to work through as a team, as a work group, is this idea that cost savings and ROI are two different measures. Cost savings has to do with students, and Oregon has done some great work. Each year they report up to the legislature on the cost savings for students. North Dakota has a pretty notable report around that was done by the auditor's office around cost savings. Massachusetts is doing a lot of thinking around this, and OEN has actually created some tools designed to help measure student cost savings. So those are some case studies you might see as we start to think about cost savings. I think there's probably others out there that I'd love to hear about if you have other favorites. But typically cost savings have three different variables for calculating cost savings. So the number of course sections that have a open education resource associated with them, which in some cases is really easy to get to, and in other cases is not. And so when we talk about identifying course sections, things like course marking come into play, whether that's behind the scenes or in front of the scenes. Another variable that we need to understand in order to determine cost savings is student enrollment. So how many students are enrolled in courses that have open education resources? And then finally, what's the multiplier? So how much do each of those students save if OER has been implemented? And that's really, I think, the most complicated part of that equation. That's where there's been a lot of different varying research done. Then on the other side, there's return on investment. And as I looked at some of the factors related to return on investment in OER, I wonder if what we're actually talking about is a cost benefit analysis approach to OER. So my background is in policy, and cost benefit analysis is it's a theory, it's a tool that's often used to understand not just monetary costs and benefits, but also non-monetary costs and benefits of a certain policy. And it's also a tool that we oftentimes use to compare different policies. So it allows you to compare counterfactuals, and it allows you to look at different audiences. So how does the state benefit? What are the state's costs and benefits? What are the institutions' costs and benefits? What might a department cost and benefits be? And so as I look at the literature, I wonder if that's something that we want to think about when we have our return on investment conversation. But there's a number of costs that are clear in the literature. There's course development costs related to implementing open education resources. There's faculty release time. There's integration costs. How do we integrate these books into our system? How do we integrate this approach into our traditional systems? Is there a loss to our bookstores or various other ancillary services? So those are all some of the costs. I'm sure there are others that should be added to this list, and we're continuing to look at those. There's also benefits, so institutional or state return. So things like some of the research is showing that there can be increased course enrollment, increased credit accumulation, improved retention, and those things are beneficial to institutions because they bring in more revenue. They can also be beneficial to institutions because they help them in. One of my recent interviewees talked about how they might be helpful in state funding formulas. And so there's probably a lot that should be included in this list. Another thing we've talked a lot about is improved educational outcomes, retaining knowledge, the ability to be able to make our courses more culturally competent, and whether or not that improves learning outcomes or helps close equity gaps. And so those are all things that we're thinking about as we talk about the return on investment or a cost benefit analysis approach. There's some really good examples of this out there. SUNY, the work that SUNY has done and Achieving the Dream. And then there's a Lumen tool out there that also tries to quantify a lot of these variables, but that may not always be quantifiable. So one of the things we're working through is, are these the right terms? What needs to be included in these lists? But really thinking about making a distinction between cost savings, which is beneficial to students, and return on investment, which is more about the system. So stickiest, I want to go through the two stickiest issues. I think the two things we'll be really like digging into as the next month goes on. The multiplier I mentioned earlier is something that there's actually a lot of research out there. People are using different multipliers to determine how much cost savings you really do get when you implement OER over a textbook. And we know that the textbook industry is also adapting and offering new products. And so that is going to be an important thing for us to think about, is how do we construct a multiplier, and how do we put some guidance around, like, what do we do when the market changes? There's a multiplier. I mean, when I look at the data, there's a lot of kind of comes together around the mean of $100. I know people have been using $100 as a proxy a lot of times, but a lot of the research also has kind of come around that $100 mark. So we're going to be looking deeper in, why did that number come about, and is it the right number, or what kinds of is it the right starting point? And then we encourage people to make adjustments from there. So that's one of the major conversations we'll be having with stakeholders, and we'll be having with our own working group, and we'll be really testing in the literature. The other thing is the benefits, and getting to understand that getting to a comprehensive list of benefits, understanding where the literature is strongest on the benefit side, especially the non-monetary benefits of OER, and where there's opportunity to grow the literature around the some non-monetary benefits, and which of those non-monetary benefits can be quantified. So if I think about retention, that's a non-monetary benefit, but that can be quantified in an equation. And so really kind of digging down into the benefits side of things, I think is going to be another challenge. And then I was reminded by one of our advisory group members in an interview yesterday, the costs are not always clear either. So I think that those are really going to be the three areas that we have to dig into. In order to help guide that framework and those two different equations that we're working on, we really wanted to create some principles. And these are working principles for the field. I am an economist originally by training early in my education. And in economics, the way that we can create the way that we do things is we make a lot of assumptions, and what's most important is you define what those assumptions are. And so I think these working principles could also be considered assumptions, and they help guide how we make decisions when we are looking at the variables to put into our framework. So these are going to change, and they're going to be wordsmithed as I have gotten feedback from members of our working group, and as I get feedback to others who want to give it. But it starts with the idea that all students should have equitable access to course material, and that I would add to this, and that you need course material to be successful in a course. And that's why a faculty member asks you to have course material. And so that is kind of one of the key assumptions. We want to assume that we are putting course material, like the course material is required, and that all students should have equal access to course material, regardless of how they are currently acting. The second working principle is that OER resources are at least as good as commercial or all rights reserved textbooks at supporting learning and improved outcomes. There's a lot of literature out there that shows that when you make the comparison between the counterfactual of those all rights reserved textbooks, that students are learning that there is a quality, that OER meets the quality standards for textbooks. And so that is one of the working assumptions that we have. Next is that at least a portion of costs of OER implementation is not unique to OER. So a lot of times we talk about the development of OER and the development costs associated with OER. Some of those costs are just part of the normal everyday implementation of any kind of resource into a course. Any good quality course development is going to require a faculty member to integrate learning materials into those courses, whether they're traditional textbooks and learning materials or OER textbooks and learning materials. And so understanding what is unique to OER that might change the resource needs or increase the costs. We know that there's already a library of OER resources out there. In fact, I was on a webinar with SRED this morning and got lots of really good new insight into how people might use the existing libraries to reduce costs of implementing OER. And so we need to think about whether or not OER actually needs to be created or whether or not it can be implemented and how that factors into the cost equation. Our fifth principle is that OER has benefits beyond the direct costs that need to be acknowledged. So when we think about our cost benefit equation that I was talking about, looking at benefits beyond just student cost savings, looking at things like retention, looking at things like improved learning, looking at things like being able to adapt for changes in what happened in the news yesterday. Those are unique benefits to OER that we want to make sure that we acknowledge and recognize through this process. So we want to have consistency, but to scale, we're going to also have to expect that we're going to have estimates. So we're not going to have a perfect number. We're not going to have the number that reflects every single possible intricacy through this work, and we have to just be okay with that. And the good news is that most policymakers are expecting high-level numbers. They're not expecting specifics. So thinking through where the lines are in creating good estimates and how we help support good estimates through this work, I think is another thing we're thinking about. And then finally, you need different levels of specificity depending on the kind of stakeholder you're working with. So when I work with legislators, they just need to know the kind of impact they're going to make and the direction of that impact. How big is it going to be? And is it going to be good? Is it what they want to see? Versus versus somebody who's actually making budgetary decisions for a department. They need to be able to understand what the actual costs are and what they can expect to get from implementing open education resources. So they need much more specific information than somebody who's a policymaker or even somebody who might be overseeing a program at the state level or even a system level sometimes. And so we really want to recognize that in this work and make sure that we're accounting for it. We're probably missing things. We certainly have not gotten the words on all of this right. And that's why the next couple months will really be pressure testing these concepts and ideas with different groups and with different experts before we kind of come out with the final framework and set of working principles. So this is just kind of a preview of where we have started, and we'll continue to work with our advisory group to do this work. So I have two things that I think might be helpful for all of you that I'm going to put into the chat. The first is where you can keep track of our work and see updates. It's the website where you might have heard about the webinar. And then the second thing that I want to make sure to share with you is a form. And this form is designed to give you an opportunity to let us know if you want us to come out and talk to somebody and to give us your thinking and thoughts. It's simple. You're not required to fill it out, but if you do want to get involved, part of my values and part of what I think is going to make this process work is having true, authentic feedback from the field and having an inclusive and transparent process. And so the more information we get from you, the more insight I get from each of you, the better I can help guide our work and make sure that we're accounting for all the factors. So any insight you have, please feel free to use that. Feel free to reach out to me at any point. I like this graphic because we all think that creating policy or creating a movement is as easy as moving from point A to point B. But in reality, public policy and almost all the work we do in higher education is much more complicated. And so iterative processes that allow us to look at the complexity and try to distill it down into something simple, but be flexible enough to continuously change and continuously improve are what I found works the best. And so that's really what's guiding this process and why I'm so happy to be working with the team at NCOER on it. So that I'm happy to, I'm sorry, I'm horrible at managing the chat while I'm talking, but I'm happy to see if we've got any questions or answer any questions that folks might have.
Thanks so much, Katie. If you'd like to ask a question, please go ahead and use the Q&A box in your menu. I'm not seeing any questions yet, but I will note, Katie, one thought in the chat from Richard Hirschman is on considering tax and potential tax revenue loss, because many states, especially in the Midwest, do tax textbook sales. So that might be another sort of cost or benefit item to consider.
That's a really good point.
He also shared a study with us in the chat, so we can take a look at it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rich. Any questions? Katie, while we wait to see if there's questions, do you want to talk a little bit about what's next in the process? Just reminding folks again, sort of what's been done so far and what's next.
Yes, I'd love to. Thanks so much, Annika. So we will be out there, like I said, we'll be out there talking to internal OER groups, understanding, finding the pieces of literature we haven't looked at that might add, like the one that was just shared, and just really kind of trying to make sure that we have all the tools we need to draft our initial principles. That process should happen towards the end of September or the beginning of October. And then starting in October, we'll be talking to more general stakeholder groups to look at the final kind of the final working draft to get their thoughts and feedback and socialize that. My birthday is January 12th, and so our goal is to have a final report out by my birthday, which means that in early 2022, we'll hopefully have a product that then the community can start to talk about and use as a tool. And so I think through that process, hopefully it will also be an opportunity for our working group members, all of our compacts and various other organizations who are interested in endorsing these ideas to get out there and talk about them and how they might be applied.
Great, thanks so much. So it looks like we still don't have any questions. So I think you did a really good job. You left everyone speechless. Also, I know we have quite a few attendees that are on our working group and already well informed about the work. So I think at this point, if we don't have any other questions, we can probably wrap up. So I just want to say thank you to you, Katie, for all this great work that you've been doing. And thank you to the Hewlett Foundation for supporting this work, and for our colleagues at the other compacts for being our partners in this work, and especially to our working group of advisors who's helping keep us honest and hopefully stay out of too much trouble as we start to make some decisions about the direction of this work. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending, and I hope to see you again as this work wraps up to share what we found.